Jace adjusted the collar of his thermal suit as he stepped off the shuttle onto the shimmering surface of Zanera. The planet's twin moons cast an ethereal glow over the landscape, illuminating the bioluminescent flora that dotted the horizon. As a human engineer, he had been assigned to work on the Zaneri quantum core, a piece of technology far beyond human understanding. His assignment was both an honor and a challenge, one he was determined to meet. His guide, a Zanari named Kalen, met him at the landing pad. Kalen's silver skin glimmered under the moonlight, and his voice carried a melodic tone as he spoke. "Welcome to Zanara, Jace. I trust your journey was comfortable." Jace nodded, his eyes scanning the alien architecture that surrounded them. Kalen led him to a sleek hovercraft, and as they sped toward the research facility, he leaned closer to Jace. "There's something you should know," Kalen said, his tone serious. "My sister, Lyra, is in her radiant cycle. It's a biological phase unique to our species. You must keep your door locked at all times." Jace raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not overly concerned. "Radiant cycle. What does that mean?" Kalen hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's a time of heightened energy. She's not herself. Just lock your door, Jace. It's for your safety." Jace nodded, though the warning seemed exaggerated. He was here to work, not to get involved in alien biology. After hours of working on the quantum core, Jace returned to his quarters, exhausted. The room was spacious, with walls that pulsed faintly with light. He stripped off his suit, collapsing onto the bed. The thought of locking the door crossed his mind, but he dismissed it. "What's the worst that could happen?" he muttered before drifting into sleep. Hours later, a soft sound roused him from his slumber. The door had slid open, and a figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the moonlight. Jace sat up, his heart racing as the figure stepped closer. It was Lyra. Her silver skin glowed faintly, and her eyes, a deep shade of violet, locked onto his. "I could feel your presence," she whispered, her voice like a melody. So warm, so alive. Jace's mind raced, but his body responded instinctively to her proximity. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, and he felt a strange pull, as if their very beings were connected. "Your brother warned me about you," Jace said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra smiled, her lips curving into a mischievous grin. "And yet, you left your door open." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his chest. "I think you wanted this as much as I do." Before Jace could respond, Lyra pressed her lips to his, and the world around them faded away. Her kiss was electric, sending waves of sensation through his body. He felt a surge of emotions that weren't his own: desire, curiosity, and something deeper, something primal. When she pulled back, her eyes searched his. "This is your last chance to stop," she breathed. Jace hesitated for only a moment before pulling her closer, sealing their fate. The twin moons bathed the room in soft light as Jace awoke, his body tangled in the silken sheets. Lyra lay beside him, her silver skin glowing faintly. The events of the night rushed back to him, and he felt a strange sense of connection, as if a part of her had become a part of him. Lyra stirred, her violet eyes meeting his. "Good morning, my star," she purred, her voice filled with warmth. Jace smiled, though a part of him wondered what he had gotten himself into. As they dressed, Lyra explained the significance of the radiant cycle. "It's not just about attraction," she said. "It's about bonding on a level deeper than your species understands." Jace felt a chill run down his spine. "What does that mean for us?" Lyra's expression softened. "It means we're connected now, Jace, in ways you can't yet imagine." Their moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Kalen stood there, his expression a mix of concern and frustration. "I warned you, Jace," he said, his voice tight. "Now the council will want to know everything." Jace felt a knot form in his stomach. "What have I done?" he whispered. Lyra took his hand, her touch sending a wave of reassurance through him. "You've started something beautiful," she said, "but it won't be easy." As they stepped out into the glowing light of Zenera's morning, Jace realized his life would never be the same. The unlocked door had been the catalyst for a bond that would change not only his destiny, but the fate of two species. The twin moons of Zenera hung low in the sky, casting a soft, silvery glow over the research facility. Jace sat on the edge of the bed, his mind racing as he tried to process the events of the previous night. Lyra lay beside him, her silver skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. Her violet eyes watched him intently, a small smile playing on her lips. "You're thinking too hard," she said, her voice a soothing melody. "Just feel." Jace turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Feel what? What exactly happened last night?" Lyra sat up, her movements fluid and graceful. "We formed a bond," she explained. "It's something that happens during the radiant cycle. It's rare, but when it does, it's profound." Jace shook his head, still struggling to understand. A bond. Like emotionally, physically. Lyra's smile widened. "Both. And more. It's hard to explain to someone who isn't Ceneri." As the day progressed, Jace began to notice subtle changes in himself. His senses felt sharper, as if the world around him had come into sharper focus. He could hear the faint hum of the quantum core from across the facility, a sound he had never noticed before. His skin tingled with a strange energy, and he found himself instinctively knowing where Lyra was, even when she wasn't in the same room. "It's the bond," Lyra explained when he mentioned it. "Our connection is growing stronger. Soon, you'll be able to feel my emotions, maybe even hear my thoughts." Jace frowned. "That sounds invasive." Lyra laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "It's not invasive. It's intimate. It's how we connect with those we care about." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group of Ceneri officials. Their silver skin was adorned with intricate markings, and their presence commanded respect. At the head of the group was a tall, imposing figure with deep violet eyes that seemed to pierce through Jace's very soul. "I am Counselor Vyra," she said, her voice cool and measured. "We've come to assess the situation." Jace felt a surge of unease, but Lyra placed a calming hand on his arm. "It's all right," she whispered. "They're just here to understand what's happened." Counselor Vyra's gaze shifted to Lyra. "You know the implications of this, Lyra. A bond with a human. It's unprecedented." Lyra met her gaze steadily. "I know, but it's also beautiful. You'll see." The counselors led Jace and Lyra to a large circular chamber filled with strange, glowing devices. Jace felt a wave of apprehension as they were separated, each placed in a different part of the room. "We need to measure the strength of your bond," Counselor Vyra explained. "It's important that we understand its nature." As the tests began, Jace felt a strange sensation, as if something was tugging at the edges of his mind. He closed his eyes, focusing on the feeling, and suddenly, he was no longer in the chamber. He was standing in a vast, open field, the twin moons shining brightly overhead. Lyra stood before him, her silver skin glowing softly. "This is our bond," she said, her voice echoing in his mind. "It's a place where we can meet, no matter how far apart we are." Jace reached out, his hand brushing against Lyra's. The moment their skin touched, a flood of emotions washed over him. Joy, curiosity, and a deep, unshakable connection. He could feel Lyra's thoughts, her memories, her very essence. It was overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. "This is incredible," he whispered. Lyra smiled. "It's just the beginning." Back in the chamber, the counselors watched in awe as the devices around them lit up, their readings off the charts. "The bond is stronger than we anticipated," one of them murmured. "This could change everything." Counselor Vyra's expression was unreadable, but Jace could sense her unease. "We'll need to monitor this closely," she said. "The implications are too great to ignore." As the days passed, the bond between Jace and Lyra continued to grow stronger. They could communicate without speaking, sharing thoughts and emotions with a simple touch. But with the bond came challenges. Jace found himself struggling to adjust to the constant presence of Lyra's emotions in his mind. It was as if a part of her had taken up residence in his soul, and while it was beautiful, it was also overwhelming. Lyra, too, felt the strain. "It's not easy for us either," she admitted one evening as they sat together under the twin moons. "Sharing so much of ourselves. It's intense, but it's also worth it." Jace nodded, though he still had doubts. "What happens now? What does this mean for us?" Lyra took his hand, her touch sending a wave of reassurance through him. "It means we're connected, Jace, in ways neither of us fully understands yet, but we'll figure it out together." The counselors convened to discuss their findings, their voices low and serious. "The bond is unprecedented," Counselor Vira said. "It could have far-reaching implications for both our species." Another counselor nodded. "But it's also dangerous. We don't know what this could lead to." As the debate raged on, Jace and Lyra waited anxiously for the verdict. Finally, Counselor Vira emerged, her expression grave. "We've decided to allow the bond to continue," she said, "but under strict supervision. We'll be monitoring you closely." Jace felt a surge of relief, but Lyra's expression was guarded. "Thank you," she said. "We won't let you down." As they left the council chamber, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. The bond had changed everything, and he knew there would be challenges ahead. But with Lyra by his side, he felt a sense of hope. "We'll figure this out," he said, squeezing her hand. Lyra smiled, her violet eyes glowing with determination. "Together," she replied. And as they walked into the glowing light of Zenera's evening, Jace realized that the unlocked door had been just the beginning. The bond had opened a new chapter in his life, one filled with possibilities he had never imagined. The days that followed the council's decision were filled with tension. Jace and Lyra were constantly monitored, their every move recorded and analyzed. The bond between them, once a private and intimate connection, now felt like a spectacle under a microscope. Jace could feel the council's presence like a shadow, always lingering at the edges of his thoughts. Lyra, however, remained steadfast. "They're just afraid," she said one evening as they sat in the observation chamber. "They don't understand what we have, so they fear it." Jace sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get that, but it's exhausting. I feel like I can't breathe without someone watching." Lyra reached out, her hand brushing against his. "We'll get through this, together." The council's tests became more invasive, probing deeper into the nature of their bond. Jace was subjected to a series of neural scans, his mind laid bare for the counselors to examine. The experience was disorienting, as if his thoughts were no longer his own. "This is too much," he muttered after one particularly grueling session. "I feel like a lab rat." Lyra's expression was sympathetic, but there was a flicker of frustration in her violet eyes. "They're pushing too hard," she agreed. "But we have to show them that this bond is a good thing, that it's not something to fear." Jace nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. As word of the bond spread, factions began to form within the Zeneri society. Some saw it as a sign of progress, a bridge between their species and humanity. Others viewed it as a threat, a dangerous deviation from their traditions. The tension was palpable, and Jace could feel it in the air whenever he walked through the facility. One day, as he and Lyra were returning from a test, they were approached by a group of Zeneri. Their markings were bold and angular, a stark contrast to the intricate patterns of the counselors. "You're the human," one of them said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "The one bonded to Lyra." Jace nodded cautiously. "That's me." The Zeneri studied him for a moment before speaking again. "We've been watching you. We believe your bond could be the key to uniting our species." Lyra's eyes lit up at the words. "You see it too," she said. "The potential." The Zeneri nodded. "We do, but not everyone agrees. There are those who would see this bond destroyed." Jace felt a chill run down his spine. Destroyed. What do you mean? The Zenera's expression was grim. There are forces at work that fear change. They will stop at nothing to maintain the status quo. That night, Jace and Lyra were awakened by a loud crash. The door to their quarters had been forced open, and a group of masked figures stood in the doorway. Their markings were obscured, but their intentions were clear. "You shouldn't exist," one of them hissed, his voice low and menacing. "This bond is an abomination." Jace leaped to his feet, his heart pounding. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figures didn't respond. Instead, they advanced, their movements swift and deliberate. Lyra stepped forward, her violet eyes blazing. "You won't touch him," she said, her voice firm. The bond between them flared to life, a surge of energy that filled the room. The figures hesitated, clearly unprepared for the intensity of their connection. In the chaos that followed, Jace and Lyra managed to escape, fleeing into the labyrinthine corridors of the facility. Their bond guided them, a silent compass that led them to safety. "We can't stay here," Jace said as they crouched in a hidden alcove. "They'll keep coming for us." Lyra nodded, her expression determined. "We need to leave. Find somewhere they can't reach us." They made their way to the outskirts of the facility, where the landscape shifted from sleek, glowing structures to rugged, untamed wilderness. The Outer Wilds were a lawless region, home to those who sought freedom from the Council's control. It was a dangerous place, but it was also their only option. As they ventured deeper into the wilds, Jace felt a sense of unease. "What if we're walking into a trap?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "We'll be safe here. The Council's reach doesn't extend this far." Jace wasn't convinced, but he trusted Lyra. Their bond had become his anchor, a constant reminder that they were in this together. Their journey led them to an ancient Ceneri temple, its walls covered in glowing runes. "This place. It's sacred," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "It's said that the answers to our greatest questions can be found here." Jace frowned. "What kind of answers?" Lyra didn't respond. Instead, she placed her hand on the wall, and the rooms began to glow brighter. As the light intensified, Jace felt a strange sensation, as if the temple itself was alive. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's eyes were closed, her expression one of deep concentration. "The temple is showing us something," she said. "A prophecy." Suddenly, Jace was no longer in the temple. He was standing in a vast, open field, the twin moons shining brightly overhead. Before him stood a figure, their features obscured by a glowing light. "You are the bridge," the figure said, their voice echoing in his mind. "The bond you share is the key to uniting our worlds." Jace felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of awe and fear. "What does that mean?" he asked. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they reached out, their hand brushing against his. In that moment, Jace felt a flood of knowledge, a glimpse of the future that awaited them. When Jace opened his eyes, he was back in the temple. Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes filled with wonder. "Did you see it?" she asked. Jace nodded, his mind still reeling from the vision. "We're part of something bigger," he said. "Something that could change everything." Lyra took his hand, her touch sending a wave of reassurance through him. "We'll face it together," she said, "no matter what comes next." As they left the temple, Jace felt a sense of determination. The bond had brought them together, but it had also set them on a path that neither of them could have anticipated. The Council, the factions, the prophecy, it was all part of a larger story, one that they were now at the center of. "We'll figure this out," Jace said, his voice filled with resolve. Lyra smiled, her violet eyes glowing with pride. "Together," she replied. And as they walked into the glowing light of Zenera's evening, Jace realized that their journey was far from over. The bond had opened a door to a future filled with possibilities, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The ancient Ceneri temple stood silent and imposing, its walls covered in glowing runes that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. Jace and Lyra stood at its entrance, their bond humming with anticipation. The vision they had shared in the temple had left them both shaken and awestruck. "This changes everything," Jace said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, her violet eyes reflecting the glow of the runes. "The prophecy. It's about us. About what we can become." As they stepped out of the temple, the weight of their discovery settled over them. The bond they shared was more than just a connection. It was a key to something greater, something that could unite their species. But with that knowledge came danger. The factions that sought to destroy their bond were still out there, and the Council's scrutiny was relentless. The decision to flee. "We can't stay here," Jace said, his voice firm. "If the Council finds out about the prophecy, they'll never let us go. And if the factions catch us—" He trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Lyra's expression was resolute. "We'll go to the Outer Wilds. It's the only place where we'll be safe." The Outer Wilds were a vast, untamed region on the outskirts of Zanera. It was a place where the Council's influence waned, and those who sought freedom from their control could disappear. But it was also a dangerous place, home to outcasts and rebels who lived by their own rules. Jace knew it was a risk, but it was their only option. They set out under the cover of darkness, their path illuminated by the faint glow of the twin moons. The bond between them guided their steps, a silent compass that led them through the labyrinthine corridors of the facility and into the wilderness beyond. As they ventured deeper into the wilds, the landscape shifted from sleek, glowing structures to rugged, untamed terrain. The air was thick with the scent of alien flora, and the ground beneath their feet was soft and yielding. Jace could feel the tension in Lyra's body as they walked, her senses heightened by the bond. "We'll be safe here," she said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. Jace nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. As the twin moons reached their zenith, they found a secluded alcove nestled among the bioluminescent trees. The glow of the flora provided a soft, comforting light, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of alien insects. "We'll rest here for the night," Lyra said, her voice soft. Jace nodded, though sleep felt like a distant possibility. They sat together, their bond humming with a quiet intensity. Jace could feel Lyra's emotions, her fear, her determination, her hope. It was overwhelming, but also comforting. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra turned to him, her violet eyes glowing in the dim light. "We survive. We protect the bond, and we find a way to fulfill the prophecy." Their first night in the wilds was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Jace's heart raced as he scanned the darkness, his senses heightened by the bond. "Someone's here," he whispered. Lyra nodded, her body tense. "Stay close," she said, her voice firm. A figure emerged from the shadows, their silver skin glimmering faintly in the moonlight. "You're not supposed to be here," the figure said, their voice low and menacing. Jace stepped forward, his instincts kicking in. "We're just passing through," he said, his voice steady. The figure studied him for a moment before speaking again. "The wilds are no place for outsiders, especially not a human." Lyra stepped forward, her violet eyes blazing. "We're not outsiders," she said. "We're here because we have to be. Because the bond we share is important." The figure hesitated, their expression unreadable. "The bond," they repeated. "You mean?" Lyra nodded. "Yes. The bond." The figure's demeanor shifted, their hostility replaced by curiosity. "I've heard stories," they said, "about a bond that could unite our species. Is it true?" Jace exchanged a glance with Lyra before nodding. "It's true. But there are those who would see it destroyed." The figure's expression hardened. "Then you'll need help. The wilds are dangerous, but there are those who would protect you." They introduced themselves as Kale, a Zaneri who had fled the Council's control years ago. I've been living in the wilds ever since, they explained. I know this place better than anyone. If you're serious about fulfilling the prophecy, I can help. Kale led them to a hidden settlement deep within the wilds, a place where outcasts and rebels had carved out a life for themselves. The settlement was a stark contrast to the sleek, glowing structures of the facility. It was rough and makeshift, but it was also alive with energy and purpose. As the days passed, Jace and Lyra settled into life in the settlement. The bond between them continued to grow stronger, their connection deepening with each passing moment. They could communicate without speaking, sharing thoughts and emotions with a simple touch. It was overwhelming at times, but also beautiful. This is what the prophecy meant, Lyra said one evening as they sat together under the twin moons. The bond is the key. It's what will unite our species. Jace nodded, though he still had doubts. But how? How do we make people see that? Lyra's expression was thoughtful. We show them. We prove that the bond is a good thing, that it's not something to fear. This is where you'll be safe, Kale said as they entered the settlement. The council's reach doesn't extend here, and the factions won't find you. Jace felt a surge of relief, though he knew their journey was far from over. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Kale nodded. Don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead of you. Their respite was short-lived. One morning, as the twin moons hung low in the sky, the settlement was thrown into chaos. The council's forces had found them. They're here, Kale said, their voice tight with urgency. You need to go. Now. Jace and Lyra didn't hesitate. They fled into the wilderness, their bond guiding them through the dense foliage. The council's forces were close behind, their presence a constant threat. We can't keep running, Jace said, his voice strained. We need a plan. Lyra's expression was determined. We'll find a way. We always do. Their flight led them to a hidden sanctuary, a place of immense energy that pulsed with the same power as the temple. This is it, Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. The celestial convergence. This is where the prophecy will be fulfilled. Jace felt a surge of hope, though he knew the road ahead would be difficult. We'll face it together, he said, his voice filled with resolve. Lyra smiled, her violet eyes glowing with pride. Together, she replied. As they stood in the sanctuary, the bond between them flared to life, a surge of energy that filled the air. Jace knew that their journey was far from over, but he also knew that they were ready. The bond had brought them together, and it would guide them through whatever came next. We'll figure this out, Jace said, his voice filled with determination. Lyra nodded, her expression one of fierce resolve. Together, she replied. And as they walked into the glowing light of the sanctuary, Jace realized that their journey was just beginning. The bond had opened a door to a future filled with possibilities, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The hidden sanctuary was unlike anything Jace had ever seen. The air hummed with energy, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The walls of the cavern were covered in glowing runes, their patterns shifting and swirling like living things. Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes wide with wonder. This is it, she whispered. The celestial convergence, the place where the prophecy will be fulfilled. Jace felt a surge of awe, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of his mind. What exactly are we supposed to do here? He asked. Lyra turned to him, her expression thoughtful. The prophecy spoke of a bond that would unite our species. This place, it's where that bond will be strengthened, where we'll become what we're meant to be. As they explored the sanctuary, they found a series of ancient texts carved into the walls. The runes were unfamiliar to Jace, but Lyra's eyes lit up as she studied them. These are the words of the ancients, she said, her voice filled with reverence. They tell of a union between two worlds, a bond that would bridge the gap between our species. Jace frowned, his mind racing. So we're supposed to, what? Perform some kind of ritual? Lyra nodded, though her expression was uncertain. "It's not just a ritual. It's a transformation. The bond will become something more, something powerful." Their exploration was interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing through the cavern. Jace's heart raced as he turned to see a group of counselors entering the sanctuary, their silver skin glimmering in the dim light. At the head of the group was Counselor Vyra, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You've led us on quite a chase," she said, her voice cool and measured. Jace felt a surge of frustration, though he kept his voice steady. "We didn't ask for this," he said, "but we're not going to let you destroy it. The bond is important. It's the key to uniting our species." Counselor Vyra studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You don't understand the implications of what you're doing. The bond. It's dangerous. It could upset the balance of our society." As the counselors debated, Jace and Lyra turned their attention to the ancient texts. The runes seemed to come alive as they studied them, their patterns shifting and swirling with a life of their own. "We need to activate the convergence," Lyra said, her voice filled with determination. "It's the only way to fulfill the prophecy." Jace nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of his mind. "What do we need to do?" Lyra placed her hand on the wall, her touch sending a surge of energy through the runes. "We need to channel the bond, to let it flow through us and into the sanctuary." Lyra's eyes blazed with intensity. "Or it could change it for the better. You're afraid of what you don't understand, but that doesn't mean it's wrong." The tension in the air was palpable, and Jace could feel the weight of the council's scrutiny pressing down on him. Lyra stepped forward, her expression defiant. "We're not running anymore," she said. "This is where we belong. This is where the prophecy will be fulfilled." Counselor Vyra's gaze shifted to the ancient texts on the walls, her expression unreadable. "The prophecy," she repeated. "You truly believe it's about you?" As they began the ritual, the air around them seemed to come alive. The bond between them flared to life, a surge of energy that filled the cavern with light. Jace felt a strange sensation, as if his very being was being pulled apart and reassembled. The world around him faded away, replaced by a vast, open field bathed in the light of the twin moons. Before him stood a figure, their features obscured by a glowing light. "You are the bridge," the figure said, their voice echoing in his mind. "The bond you share is the key to uniting our worlds." Jace felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of awe and fear. "What does that mean?" he asked. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they reached out, their hand brushing against his. In that moment, Jace felt a flood of knowledge, a glimpse of the future that awaited them. When Jace opened his eyes, he was back in the sanctuary. The bond between him and Lyra had grown stronger, their connection deepening with each passing moment. The counselors watched in awe as the runes on the walls pulsed with energy, their patterns shifting and swirling with a life of their own. "This changes everything," Counselor Vyra said, her voice filled with wonder. "The bond. It's more powerful than we imagined." Jace felt a surge of hope, though he knew their journey was far from over. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice filled with determination. Lyra nodded, her expression one of fierce resolve. "Together," she replied. As they left the sanctuary, Jace felt a sense of purpose. The bond had brought them together, and it would guide them through whatever came next. The council's scrutiny, the factions, the prophecy, it was all part of a larger story, one that they were now at the center of. "We'll figure this out," Jace said, his voice filled with resolve. Lyra smiled, her violet eyes glowing with pride. "Together," she replied. And as they walked into the glowing light of the sanctuary, Jace realized that their journey was just beginning. The bond had opened a door to a future filled with possibilities, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The sanctuary pulsed with energy, the ancient runes on its walls glowing brighter with each passing moment. Jace and Lyra stood at its center, their bond humming with a power that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the universe. The counselors watched in silence, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension. "This is it," Lyra whispered, her violet eyes reflecting the light of the runes. "The celestial convergence, the moment the prophecy spoke of." Jace felt a surge of anticipation, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of his mind. "What happens now?" he asked. Lyra turned to him, her expression filled with determination. "We let the bond guide us. We become what we're meant to be." As they began the ritual, the air around them seemed to come alive. The bond between them flared to life, a surge of energy that filled the cavern with light. Jace felt a strange sensation, as if his very being was being pulled apart and reassembled. The world around him faded away, replaced by a vast, open field bathed in the light of the twin moons. Before him stood a figure, their features obscured by a glowing light. "You are the bridge," the figure said, their voice echoing in his mind. "The bond you share is the key to uniting our worlds." Jace felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of awe and fear. "What does that mean?" he asked. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they reached out, their hand brushing against his. In that moment, Jace felt a flood of knowledge, a glimpse of the future that awaited them. When Jace opened his eyes, he was back in the sanctuary. The bond between him and Lyra had grown stronger, their connection deepening with each passing moment. The counselors watched in awe as the runes on the walls pulsed with energy, their patterns shifting and swirling with a life of their own. "This changes everything," Counselor Vyra said, her voice filled with wonder. "The bond, it's more powerful than we imagined." Jace felt a surge of hope, though he knew their journey was far from over. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice filled with determination. Lyra nodded, her expression one of fierce resolve. "Together," she replied. As the ritual reached its peak, the counselors found themselves torn. Some saw the bond as a sign of progress, a bridge between their species and humanity. Others viewed it as a threat, a dangerous deviation from their traditions. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jace could feel the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on him. "We need to decide," Counselor Vyra said, her voice firm. "Do we embrace this bond, or do we destroy it?" The counselors debated, their voices low and serious. Jace and Lyra stood together, their bond humming with a quiet intensity. "Whatever they decide," Lyra whispered, "we'll face it together." As the ritual reached its peak, the bond between Jace and Lyra flared to life, a surge of energy that filled the cavern with light. The counselors watched in awe as the runes on the walls pulsed with energy, their patterns shifting and swirling with a life of their own. "This changes everything," Counselor Vyra said, her voice filled with wonder. "The bond, it's more powerful than we imagined." Jace felt a surge of hope, though he knew their journey was far from over. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice filled with determination. Lyra nodded, her expression one of fierce resolve. "Together," she replied. As they left the sanctuary, Jace felt a sense of purpose. The bond had brought them together, and it would guide them through whatever came next. The council's scrutiny, the factions, the prophecy. It was all part of a larger story, one that they were now at the center of. "We'll figure this out," Jace said, his voice filled with resolve. Lyra smiled, her violet eyes glowing with pride. "Together," she replied. And as they walked into the glowing light of the sanctuary, Jace realized that their journey was just beginning. The bond had opened a door to a future filled with possibilities, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The celestial convergence had left the sanctuary forever changed. The rooms on its walls now glowed with a steady, pulsing light, and the air hummed with an energy that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the universe. Jace and Lyra stood at its center, their bond stronger than ever, their connection a living testament to the power of unity. The counselors watched in silence, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension. Counselor Vyra stepped forward, her violet eyes filled with a newfound respect. "What you've done here, it's beyond anything we could have imagined," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The bond between you is more than just a connection. It's a bridge between our species." After hours of deliberation, the council reached a decision. "We will recognize the bond," Counselor Vira announced, her voice firm. "It is a sign of progress, a step toward a future where our species can coexist in harmony." Jace felt a surge of relief, though he knew their journey was far from over. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Lyra's expression was one of fierce pride. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The bond is the key to uniting our worlds, and we'll do whatever it takes to protect it." Word of the Council's decision spread quickly, reaching the factions that had sought to destroy the bond. Some saw it as a sign of hope, a chance to unite their species. Others viewed it as a threat, a dangerous deviation from their traditions. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jace could feel the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on him. "We need to decide," Counselor Vira said, her voice firm. "Do we embrace this bond, or do we destroy it?" The counselors debated, their voices low and serious. Jace and Lyra stood together, their bond humming with a quiet intensity. "Whatever they decide," Lyra whispered, "we'll face it together." As the days passed, the bond between Jace and Lyra became a symbol of hope for both humans and Zenari. Their connection inspired others to embrace the possibilities of unity, and soon more bonds began to form between their species. The sanctuary became a place of pilgrimage, a living testament to the power of the celestial convergence. Jace and Lyra stood together, their bond humming with a quiet intensity. "We've come so far," Jace said, his voice filled with pride. "But there's still so much to do." Lyra nodded, her violet eyes glowing with determination. "We'll face it together," she replied. As they walked into the glowing light of the sanctuary, Jace realized that their journey was just beginning. The bond had opened a door to a future filled with possibilities, and he was ready to face whatever came next. "We'll figure this out," Jace said, his voice filled with resolve. Lyra smiled, her violet eyes glowing with pride. "Together," she replied. And as they walked into the glowing light of the sanctuary, Jace realized that their journey was just beginning. The bond had opened a door to a future filled with possibilities, and he was ready to face whatever came next.